Hello, this is Curt Pringle, and thanks for tuning into the Talking Issues series. We try to talk public policy issues in California, and today we probably will tackle one of the most challenging, most interesting, and also one of the more complex. I mean, the history of California is based around really water and how Southern California developed and the continuing development of Southern California. California is one of the largest ag states, if not the largest in the country, and water is fundamental to those crops and that industry. So water really has played a part, and you can see it in movies, books, TV shows, all about the California water system. But today we want to talk to the source, the chairman of the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. That's the largest water agency in the country. It serves over half the people in all of California, over 19 million customers. Think about that. Get their water that is being imported to the region and provided within this region by the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. I'll get that wrong, but still, I want to make sure it's right. So today I want to introduce Adan Ortega, the chair of that board and overseeing that massive structure. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's great to see you.
Yes. So 1928, this water district was created, and neither you or I were around, thank goodness, for that back then. But it's a more sophisticated and fantastic agency today. So tell me, how do you present to people what MET, as it's commonly called, what MET does in terms of its services?
Okay, well, we import water, as you stated, from the Colorado River. We were formed in 1928 with the express purpose of building the Colorado River Aqueduct, which begins in what's now called Lake Havasu. It was facilitated by the construction of Hoover Dam because it was going to require a massive amount of power to move that water over 200 miles across the hot desert into the coastal plain of Southern California. And so those two go hand in hand, and Hoover Dam was the foundational construction that needed to happen in order for us to be able to have water supplies all the way out on the coastal plain of this region. We serve the 19 million residents between Ventura down to the Mexican border. In San Diego, we cover 6 counties of Southern California where this population resides. It would be the 11th largest economy in the world if it were a country in and of itself, and it's worth about $1.6 trillion in economic goods and production. So it's a massive area. It's a massive undertaking. We run the largest water treatment system in the United States, and we also are the largest urban supplier in the country, as you stated.
I mean, it's interesting to think everybody can picture Hoover Dam, and the purpose of the dam was really to provide power for water delivery.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty.
Well, and there were some other things too. So, for example, when the aqueduct was constructed, primarily during the 1930s, there were 30,000 people out there building this aqueduct. And what's today Kaiser Permanente got its start during the construction of the Colorado River Aqueduct. So, we had a foundational role in modern healthcare. We had a foundational role in terms of building a massive structure like the Colorado River Aqueduct and all of the major pumping stations that we have. We have 5 major pumping operations paralleling the I-10. And so, yeah, it's a big deal.
Yes. No. And it's interesting who is MET. You basically are a water district, but you have so many other local government partners that are a part. I think I read 26 separate local government entities, of which Fullerton, where you reside, and Anaheim, where we are sitting right now, were some of those early cities that were a part of that structure.
That's right. And I used to represent Fullerton. I don't anymore. I represent the smallest and last member of the Metropolitan Water District, which was the city of San Fernando. And what happened in 1971 is that we had the big Silmar earthquake. The city was in a big dispute with the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. Their wells went down and they needed a water supply. So Governor Reagan basically ordered the Metropolitan Water District to serve the city of San Fernando, which is only 4 square miles. Today it only has 24,000 residents. because our treatment plant was right across the freeway, the Jensen treatment plant, or what became the Jensen treatment plant. It wasn't quite what it is today. And I now represent the smallest and the poorest member of the Metropolitan Water District's family.
Yes. And we should probably talk about how that board is. How do you govern with that? But the structure, it was originally multiple local governments getting together, banding together, financing the structure together. And at that point in time, I think from Orange County perspective, Anaheim, Santa Ana, and Fullerton were three cities that were here that participated in that from the very beginning.
Right. And what happened is that after World War II, with the housing boom, you had all these other cities that wanted to join. And if we had done that, we'd be bigger than the United Nations right now in terms of our governance. So what was created was a mechanism in the law, under state law, that allowed cities to coalesce and form what we call now municipal water districts. And so we have the 12 original cities that belong to Metropolitan and San Fernando. And then you also have 12 municipal water districts and a county water authority. So there's 26 member agencies, ranging from municipal utilities to these, municipal water districts that are groups of cities, and then the county water authority in San Diego County.
Yeah. So I mean, not to get tied up in the governance type issue, but if you think about the city of LA or the county of Los Angeles or Fullerton or San Fernando as a city, they may have individuals that sit on your board that represent those areas and the users of water within those areas. But I think you have one of the more unique structures on how you measure people's votes.
That's an excellent point. So we have a weighted vote system that's based on your tax valuation.
Yeah.
And so every year it gets adjusted by the assessor's office of the 6 counties, and you're apportioned the weight of your percentage of that county's value. So, for example, when I represented Fullerton, that was worth 0.6%, 0.6%, almost 1%. I represent the city of San Fernando today, and my weighted vote is 0.007.
So you're a body sitting on a board, and number of members.
We have 38 members on our board.
So you are 38 people sitting up there that each has a different weighting for what their vote counts for.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so the city of Los Angeles has the largest apportionment of votes. They have close to 21%. San Diego County Water Authority is the second at about 16%. And then the Municipal Water District of Orange County is the third. And so not only that, there's also down on the ground variations in who runs infrastructure.
Yeah.
So like the city of San Fernando, we have our own water distribution system. So does the city of Fullerton. The Municipal Water District of Orange County has no infrastructure. They're there basically as a financing mechanism to pass through the payments of the cities onto Metropolitan.
So for people who try to figure out all these things, and I have actually, some people credit or discredit me for questioning water districts over my political career.
Well, you and I have.
Yes. But part of it is water comes from a lot of places, and we should talk about that in a little while. But the point is, Met is the wholesale provider, the entity that brings water into this region or reclaims or recycles water within it. It may not be the only ones doing that, of course, but in fact, you're doing the lion's share of importing of water.
Well, we do all the importing of water, with the exception of the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, which has an aqueduct from the Eastern Sierra. And in fact, that was the first aqueduct. And William Mulholland designed it. And then after that happened, all these other cities said, hey, we want a piece of it. So William Mulholland went and surveyed what's now the area that covers the Colorado River Aqueduct. But we're not into recycling yet. We've incentivized the recycling. And it's really a great success story. Over 25 years ago, there was an integrated resources planning project that Metropolitan began. It's been renewed every 5 years. And that planning process has led to massive efficiency in this region. And most people don't believe it, but despite the growth since 1990 by over 5 million residents, we use less water today than they used back then. So, for example, in 1990, the demands were about 3.1 million acre feet of water.
To be imported within
to
the
be,
region, or the total amount of water used?
that was the amount of water Metropolitan sold. So we would have to import that water.
Right.
And then by 2000, we were selling less. We were selling about 2.1 million acre feet. Today, we're lucky if we sell 1.34 million acre feet. And so it's kind of an unexpected story for most people, but we've become very efficient in Southern California, and I hope that gives us the leverage that we need to secure our future with climate change.
Right. So part of this, I mean, probably when I was in the legislature, people, if they got mad about anything water related, they had a hard time figuring out who's responsible. So you look at an importer of product, which is met, and then you sell it to various entities that may be also a wholesaler. Or you might sell it directly to an entity like the city of Anaheim that is the entity that sells and provides water to its residents and businesses. So there are so many checks along the path. And I do remember at one point in time in 1995, through some research in water districts, an area in San Clemente, I believe, had 5 separate entities that were responsible for the delivery of water into San Clemente. So it makes a resident really challenged to figure out how their water gets to them.
They do. It is a challenge, but it's also not front and center in most people's minds, because at the end of the day, we live in this region and you can turn the tap and the water will go on.
Right.
And unless the water smells like something or it comes out with some color, you're not going to give much thought to it.
Or it doesn't come out at all.
Or it doesn't come, but that doesn't really happen in this region. It happens in the Central Valley. And that's one of the travesties of the California water situation, that we have a human right to water declared in California. There's a trope that 1 million residents in California don't have access to safe drinking water, which is partly true. But if we have a human right to water in California, and you can't drive from one end of the state to the other without running the danger that you're going to drink water that's unsafe, then nobody has the right to safe drinking water in California. And so I think the issue of water quality and access is considered as an act of charity, when it's really in all of our self-interest to be able to traverse our state and know that we're going to have access to safe drinking water.
And the economic interests of the state.
That's right.
Be it from school kids to farmers to entrepreneurs or tourists. I mean, everyone has to have that certainty.
But my point is that we take it for granted to the degree that we don't give it a second thought as we're moving around California. But I think Californians should know, especially Southern Californians, we invest a massive amount of money on safe drinking water and our treatment plants. And if you think about it, I get outraged that if I drive through the Central Valley, that I may stop at a gas station and drink water that is high in arsenic. But we take it for granted, given the relative safety that we have in Southern California, that we don't give it a second thought as we're moving around the state.
Well, as we sit here in Anaheim, I would say, you correct me, 40% of the water that serves most of this city and Garden Grove and others come from groundwater.
Right.
And that's a source that is outside of the direct oversight of your water district, right?
Well, yes and no. We've incentivized the development of the groundwater replenishment project that the Orange County Water District built in order to take highly treated water from the sewage treatment plants and put it into the ground, where 7 years later it comes out as drinking water after it goes through extra purification from the sediments on the earth. So we've incentivized all of these projects for recycling. In fact, just last week, we approved funding for the Doheny desalination plant that South Coast Water District wants to build. Right. And so we've realized over the span of the last 25 years that the imported water wouldn't always be reliable, that we needed to build more local sources. And because of that, we have declining sales revenue now. Whether we have a drought or not, we're selling less water.
Yeah, and I think that's what people are challenged with understanding. I mean, it really is a pretty simple principle. If you see limitations in the future on Colorado River water access or Northern California access, the point is that importing of water the only way we get water here? And how you address that is you look for additional sources and use some of the resources you have to incentivize some of these other technologies.
Yeah, money is a big part of
That's
this.
good incentive.
I mean, for example, in 1993, we lost half of our Colorado River supply, and yet the aqueduct runs full. The reason it runs full is that we've incentivized farmers in the Imperial Valley and primarily in the Palo Verde Valley out by Blythe to use water efficient farming practices, which we've invested as well in developing. And then we are able to take the excess when water's conserved or when land is being rotated and the water's not being used. In fact, we're the largest landowner in the Palo Verde Valley now, and we contract farm that property. We also own 4 Delta islands in the Bay Delta up in Sacramento, where we get our Northern California supplies. And, we're very interested in keeping the Delta whole because these 100-year levees are beginning to crumble and become a problem. And so we're investing, for example, in rice farming, which is better for the land and better on the levees and better for the habitat. So, yeah, I mean, it takes a lot of creativity, but it's driven by money. And if Southern California didn't have the economic base that it has, it would be impossible. You would not have the growth that you have in this region.
Right. I mean, talking about money, I remember when the water replenishment project was moving forward in the Orange County Water District, and the whole discussion of using wastewater, cleaning it with new technologies, now pumping it back up to Anaheim and putting it in the percolation beds to filter back into the aquifer. The cost of that water was estimated to be 2.5 times the cost of importing water.
Right.
But that was done 30 years ago in terms of planning and starting that process to prepare to do that service. And therefore the cost of importing water, I'm sure, has gone up dramatically. So where's that cost formula in terms of the cost of an owned right that you have in the Colorado River, which is a certain cost, but limited in terms of the amount you can use, versus reclaiming water from wastewater or desalinization? Maybe paint the picture of where those prices are, so people just understand.
So let me paint the picture this way. When the pioneers came to California, this was a desolate land. It was sparsely populated. And they found that the best places to build cities had no rivers. So what did they do? They built them. We built these aqueducts that now bring the water here. It was a different climate for the people that came here from other places. In this day and age, we didn't have to go anywhere. But let me just get back to that era. So they built all this infrastructure. And if you look at the economic analysis of what those previous generations got, whether they ever realized a return on investment in their own economy as the system was being built, they never got their money back for it.
Right.
They built that for us. With climate change, we're in the same position, except that there's 19 million people here now. We have a system that is older, that needs to be maintained and repaired. And not only that, we have to build a new class of infrastructure to move water around because we made some assumptions that were wrong. I'll give you an example, and I'll get to your cost thing in just a second. In 2022, the people in the northern reaches of our service area, the San Fernando Valley, Ventura County, had to go into draconian conservation measures. We made an assumption that we would never get less than a 20% allocation from our Northern California supplies. That year, we got 0. And we had to go back and ask the state to give us a 5% allocation for health and safety. We had water. It was parked at Diamond Valley Lake down in Hemet. But because we assumed that we would never get anything less than a 20% allocation, we never built the pipe to get that water from Hemet up into Ventura County and all those places in between. So guess what? We got to build it now. And it's going to cost billions of dollars to make sure that there's an equitable access to all of this water that we have stored. I'll give you another one. Because of all the conservation that we have today, we have 3.4 million acre feet of water in storage right now. That's 3 years worth of unabated demands on our system. 2.1 million acre feet of that water that's in storage is because of reduced demands and all of the offsets through recycling and all of that. What's the value of that water? It's about $8 billion. But let's separate all that out. If we want to know what the value of that water is, just think about what the value of what we were able to have to do in these northern reaches in 2022. What was the value of that water that wasn't there? It was the value of the economy itself, right? So when people ask me, what's the value of all of these investments? Well, what's the value of our economy right now? It's $1.6 trillion. If you want to preserve that economy, we're going to have to make investments. And the investments will not add up to $1.6 trillion. But it'll still be expensive, right? And we're going to have to pay for it. Metropolitan, for example, had not increased our property tax in 30 years, in a period when property values more than doubled. And yet, now we're only getting 20% of our revenue from this fixed revenue that's sustaining not only the economy, but the property values. And so we just raised our ad valorem tax, or we're going to raise it in August in order to keep up with what needs to be done to keep that system whole.
Yeah, and the property tax was established way back when in fact it was the commitment to the financing of that original infrastructure.
The State Water Project.
Right.
That's right. And so now we need to build a new class of infrastructure, and we need a foundational funding source for that.
So also though, I was where I think people, when they talk about electricity and where it comes from, they can see the cost per kilowatt, and from nuclear power facilities to wind to solar to others. So that's kind of that measure. In Water Talk, it's per acre foot, right? So what is the cost to import water per acre foot into this region? And then that cost of the reclamation projects, or the recycling of wastewater project, or the price of desal?
Yeah, that's a very complex question, because at the end of the day, what a resident pays is the aggregation of their water sources. So if you live in a place where they have desal and they have groundwater and they buy some imported water, their price is going to be different because they will aggregate. And then also local utilities will make a choice on whether to load the cost of their projects on the property tax or on the rates. Mm-hmm. So I used to be assistant general manager of 2 water districts, the West Basin Municipal Water District in the South Bay of LA County. We built what at the time was the largest water recycling plant. And we chose in that district to put the cost of that project on the rate, because we wanted to incentivize the purchase of the recycled water. So we wanted to make the imported water more expensive. In the Central Basin, which is the southeast part of LA County, which we also managed, it's a poor community. So in that case, they put the cost of their recycled water on the property tax, because it was a more progressive way of doing it, and we wouldn't burden, a place that is economically less well off than the South Bay. So that's what happens. But at the end of the day, in consumer terms, a resident pays about 1/3 of a penny for every gallon that comes out of their tap in our region, which is incredibly inexpensive. Those same residents are willing to go to the supermarket and buy bottled water for 1,000 times more. They'll pay $1 a gallon for that bottled water. And so I think that there's a perception issue that the water industry has never owned up to. It's the only consumer good where people are expected to ingest the product where we don't try, and we haven't tried. I'm going to try to change that to present a value proposition to the consumer, which doesn't trust the tap water in growing numbers.
Right. Yeah, no, that's interesting. And but also, I worry about over the years, and you and I have been involved in government in different facets over the last 20, 30 years, but the greater and greater skepticism about government and government decision making all the way along. And I think as you look at water, there's a couple that kind of pop to mind as the populist questions that are out there, and that is when we have a drought, and we are all asked to cut back. Yet at the same time, you just shared that we have in reserve 3 years worth of water resources to serve the entire area. And the question is conservation directly attributed to the drought in decision making, or is it some other type of, as some people would be concerned about, government manipulation on how we utilize that resource?
Well, Southern California is in a completely different league than anywhere in the United States when it comes to your question about water consumption and how we make decisions about its use. For example, my in-laws, they live in Atlanta, Georgia. They get a lot of rain, and they don't store a lot of water. Right. So in a year that they don't have a lot of rain, they're in a direct drought situation. Here, it doesn't quite work out that way. We can be in a drought and not need to make reductions of a draconian nature because of all of the redundancy that we have built into our system. It's a matter of philosophy, but then it's also a matter of survival. If you want to be able to have the kind of economy that you have in Southern California, you need the redundancy. There's no way around it because we do not have most years favorable hydrological conditions alone in this region. We need to go 400 miles and get that melted snowpack, from Northern California. We need to go 200 miles to collect the melted snowpack from the Rockies. So people don't have to think about it, but that's what it takes. Mm-hmm. Now, I think there are inequities in our system because there are a lot of small water systems, primarily in rural areas, that are getting left behind. And that's happening simply because, it's politics and it's money. And until we have a more holistic way of viewing water in California, there's going to be those inequities that then work out. Japan, when it was destroyed in World War II, there was a blessing that came out of the destruction because they rebuilt their entire water system. And the way they built that system was with a national economy of scale. So when they implement a new regulation, they don't let everybody on their own, like, you figure it out. Here's the regulation. What they do is they create a plan, a financial plan that uses their market leverage to reduce the price of treatment, for example. So they'll go get the big cities first, and then at the end, they've got the small rural areas that have to comply. Nobody gets left behind. The problem with California and the way that we manage water is that it's everybody for themselves.
Multiple water districts.
There's 3,000 in California.
Exactly.
So if you live in a place like Southern California, where you have an entity like the Metropolitan Water District, you're pretty well off. But if you live in a community where you have less than 10,000 residents, yesterday the State Water Board passed the regulation for hexavalent chromium. In a metropolitan area, your bill might have to go up maybe $20 a month to comply with that standard if you're impacted. In a rural area, it's going to cost a resident as much as $137 a month just to comply with that
remove
that one contaminant.
Yeah, that's something. One of those other things people talk about, particularly when it rains. So the opposite side of a drought is when it rains, and all the water that runs down the the flood channels to the ocean. Are we doing enough to capture water?
So that is one of these, what is it that they call them? Well, it's an urban legend.
Yes.
Orange County and the Santa Ana River is a global model for capturing stormwater. Because of the good work of the Santa Ana Watershed Project Authority and Orange County Water District, they're collecting over 90% of the runoff that comes out of that watershed. Now, a lot could be done to collect the water that falls off of roofs and travels through streets, but that's incredibly contaminated water. It takes over 72 hours just to flush it out of the system. And how much do you want to pay? The San Gabriel River is the same. They're capturing over 90% of the San Gabriel River's flow on any given storm. The big issue is the LA River. And the LA River is interesting because from its headwaters to the coast, it's only 51 miles. So when it rains, that water runs fast and furious. Compare that to the Mississippi River. It takes 2,000 miles for that water to make its way. And by the time that water gets to the Gulf of Mexico, it's been reused dozens of times because communities will use the water upstream, they'll treat it, they'll put it back in the river, and then a downstream community will use the same water, release it until it flows out into the ocean. We don't have that here. And so there's large health and safety challenges with capturing all that water from the LA River because the amount of land and the amount of people you would have to displace in order to be able to create the spreading ground so that water can percolate would be enormous. And in fact, the reason they built the channels the way they are now is because through the 1930s, that river used to vary by as much as 20, 30 miles.
Right.
It would flood these zones and it would kill people. And that was unacceptable.
Yeah, and actually that was here too in Orange County with the Santa Ana River.
Yeah.
There is a book that I have called Village of Garden Grove, believe it or not, since I grew up in Garden Grove. And it talked about rowing a boat from basically Anaheim or Garden Grove to Costa Mesa inland because there was no banks to the Santa Ana River. And it was, I think Santa Ana River is still listed as the second most deadly river in America or something like that in terms of without that control of those banks.
That's right.
And so what is so capturing rain or moving water that's coming off of mountainsides here, the technology of water is changing, as you suggested, from conservation, not using as much, and the techniques there to reusing some of the water that has been used before. But of course, everybody points to desalination as possibly the future of water service. Do you see it that way? Do you see desal as growing dramatically in Southern California or California in general?
I think that as part of our climate adaptation master planning process, we're being forced to look at the next 100 years. If you look at the next 100 years and the development of technology, the scarcity and the erratic weather patterns that we have, we're going to have to build everything. The question is, over the next 100 years, what's the order in which we need to build? And that's going to be governed by issues like affordability, adequacy of the labor force. I'll give you one. To me, this is what scares me. The Governor Brown wanted to build two big tunnels under the Bay Delta.
And the Bay Delta is where the rivers come together near Sacramento and then channelized and head out to
the California
San Francisco.
Aqueduct and the Bay Area. So massive infrastructure would be 40 miles long, 18 feet high. You could drive a trailer through it. If we had to compete with high-speed rail for engineers right now, we wouldn't be able to build it. We do not have the talent in the United States of engineers and biologists to build an infrastructure of that magnitude. We have to bring them from other countries. And so a lot of people believe that, like, with all this rhetoric on immigration, that it impacts fast food restaurants and all of that. I'm sorry, it's going to affect whether you're going to have sewage running down your streets because because the infrastructure is old and we don't have the adequate labor force to fix it. There's communities where that's already happening. And so water agencies and infrastructure agencies are having a tough time hiring people of the educational background and skill to maintain our systems. And that's just a very sad commentary in our society right now.
But with that, desal is a source that's going to be utilized much more dramatically than it is today, since we only have one operating Southern California desalination.
Carlsbad. Well, you have several. There's another one being built in Monterey, and Santa Barbara has a desalination plant, but that's driven by economics. And for example, Santa Barbara doesn't always run their desal plant. They'll run it during a drought because it makes sense. San Diego has more water than they need right now. And part of the new business model is maybe we don't take more water from the Colorado River or Northern California. Maybe we allow a community like San Diego to move that water to South Orange County or other places where they need it. But I think that's going to smooth out over time. And we need to be looking at what it is feasible for us to do right now based on affordability.
Well, there's no question the issue of water is a challenging one and complicated one, and very appreciative for you as the chair of such a powerful agency and an important one for all of our survival, actually, in Southern California, to be able to come and spend a little time with us.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for your interest in this topic. Like I said, it's easy for people to take it for granted, but when you dig into it, I think you could understand where it's pivotal to our economy and our way of life.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being here.
Thank you very much for having me. All right.